Welcome, everyone, to another deep dive. This time we're, going pretty far out there. Psychedelics.
Oh, interesting.
Rick Strassman's book, The Psychedelic Handbook, is our starting point.
Yeah.
But, we're not here to preach,
Yeah.
saying they're good, not saying they're bad,
Right.
just trying to understand them a little better. The science, the risks, the benefits, all of it. Even the whoa, dude stuff.
I think that's a great approach.
Yeah. So what makes Strassman's book so interesting, I think, is that he's like this MD, psychiatrist, and a Buddhist practitioner.
Right. Not just the scientist looking at it from a purely clinical perspective. He brings in this whole other layer of spiritual understanding. 20 years as a Buddhist, I think.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, 20 plus years. So it's not just textbook stuff. He's really lived with these ideas.
Exactly. And he's worked with all sorts of people, too. Patients with severe mental illness, high-functioning professionals. So he's got a wide range of experience.
Yeah, which gives him a unique perspective. I mean, the guy kickstarted modern psychedelic research in the U.S., right? The DMT studies.
And those were funded by the NIH, which is pretty amazing. Speaks volumes about his credibility.
So, okay, let's start with the basics. What is a psychedelic anyway? I mean, even the name is loaded. Strassman talks about psychotomimetic, entheogen, all these terms that kind of shape how we think about them.
Yeah, psychotomimetic. Mimicking psychosis, right. It's an older term.
So, like, they make you schizophrenic.
Not exactly, but there was this idea that psychedelics create a state similar to schizophrenia. Strassman argues it's way oversimplified. Some similarities, maybe, on the surface, but...
Or like,
well, the context is completely different. Someone on a psychedelic knows it's temporary.
right, someone with schizophrenia doesn't.
Exactly.
Like, one's a controlled burn, the other's a wildfire.
Okay.
Then there's entheogen, generating the divine within. That's a pretty specific kind of spiritual experience.
Totally. It's tied to that mystical unitive idea. Oneness with the universe. Ego dissolution. Bliss.
The classic melting into the cosmos scenario.
Yeah.
But Strassman points out not all spiritual experiences are like that. He talks about the prophetic experiences in the Hebrew Bible, calls them interactive relational.
It's a different type of spiritual encounter.
Instead of dissolving, you're interacting,
Yeah.
like with a deity
Oh.
or receiving guidance.
Exactly. Still spiritual, but a different flavor.
And here's where it gets really trippy. Strassman talks about how the research team's beliefs about psychedelics can influence the subject's experience.
Oh, the power of expectation.
Yeah, placebo effect on steroids.
Right. It's not just the chemical, but the mindset, the setting, everything.
So it's not as simple as just popping a pill and seeing what happens. There's a whole lot more going on. Okay, so we've talked about how they're perceived. Now the nuts and bolts. How do these things actually work in the brain?
Well, they mess with your neurotransmitters, for one. Serotonin, dopamine. They're like the messengers in your brain. Psychedelics either mimic them or disrupt how they normally flow.
Changes in perception, mood.
And cognition. But it all starts with getting into your bloodstream. And there are a lot of ways that can happen. Swallowing, smoking, injecting.
But no matter how it gets in, it has to get past the blood-brain barrier, right?
Yeah, the brain's bouncer. Keeps the riffraff out.
But DMT, the spirit molecule, seems to have a VIP pass. Gets right through.
Which is interesting, right? Suggests it might actually have a natural role in the brain.
Wait, are you saying our brains are producing DMT all the time?
It's a possibility,
Kind
still
of.
being explored. Maybe not a full-blown trip, but maybe DMT plays a subtle role in dreaming, perhaps, or other states of consciousness.
So we're all on a low-level DMT trip all the time. That's a lot to process. What does that even mean for how we perceive reality?
It raises some pretty fundamental questions about consciousness, about the role of these neurotransmitters in shaping our experience. And it's just one of the mysteries psychedelic research is uncovering.
Definitely got me thinking. And we're just getting started.
Okay, so we've talked about the brain, the physical stuff.
Yeah, the hardware.
Right. Now let's talk about the software, the mind.
This is where things get a little more philosophical.
A little. Strassman doesn't just stop at the brain. He looks at how psychedelics affect our thoughts, our emotions, even our sense of self.
Okay, yeah, now I'm getting a little nervous. We're talking about messing with, like, the core of who we are.
In a way, yes. And he uses some interesting frameworks to explore this. He looks at Freud, for example. The ego, the superego, the id.
Right, Psych 101. Refresh my memory, though. How do those three parts work together again?
So the id is like the impulsive child, all about basic needs, desires. The superego is the strict parent, internalized rules, morality. And the ego is stuck in the middle, trying to balance those two.
Okay, so inner child throwing a tantrum, inner critic laying down the law, and the ego's just trying to keep things from falling apart.
Exactly. And Strassman suggests psychedelics can weaken the ego's control. So the id and the superego, they start duking it out more directly.
Which could be good, I guess, like
Yeah.
a breakthrough.
Or a breakdown. Depends. It's like shaking up the snow globe, you know?
Yeah, I get that. So it's not all sunshine and roses with these things.
Yeah.
But Strassman also looks at this through a Buddhist lens, right?
Right, which is totally different. He talks about the 5 functions of the mind: feeling, perception, volition, consciousness. Psychedelics could hyperactivate some of those, while others go quiet.
So it's like turning up the volume on some mental processes and muting others. That could explain why people have such wildly different experiences, right?
Absolutely. Some people feel bliss, others feel terror. It all depends on what's being amplified, what's being suppressed. And then he goes even further into medieval Jewish philosophy.
Wait, what? Jewish philosophy? How does that fit in?
Well, he uses it to explore how imagination and intellect interact under the influence of psychedelics. It's fascinating, really unexpected.
Okay, so we've got Freud, Buddha, and medieval Jewish philosophers all in the mix here. It's a lot to unpack, but I guess it makes sense, right? These things, they seem to touch on, like, every aspect of human experience.
Exactly. And it reminds us that there's no single explanation. We need all these different lenses to really understand what's going on.
Speaking of different lenses,
Yeah.
we got to talk about the risks, right? It can't all be mystical insights and ego death.
Right. There's a flip side. And Strassman's really clear about the potential downsides, but here's a surprise. Physically, classical psychedelics are actually pretty non-toxic.
Don't toxic, really.
Yeah, more so than aspirin, actually.
Less toxic than aspirin. But that doesn't mean they're safe, right?
No, not at all. The real dangers are elsewhere, like triggering a mental health condition, say someone with latent schizophrenia. Psychedelics could push them into a full-blown psychosis.
Oh, that's scary. So yeah, not for everyone, that's for sure. But what about, like, bad trips? Is that just, an exaggeration, or is there a real risk of having a negative experience?
Bad trips are very real. They can be really rough. Anxiety, paranoia, panic attacks, even feeling like you're losing touch with reality.
Yeah, that's what I'd be worried about. Losing control, going down some dark rabbit hole. And what about flashbacks? Are those as common as people say?
Actually, they are more common than you might think, but usually pretty mild, brief, just a weird sensation or a sudden wave of emotion. But some people do experience more persistent issues. It's called HPPD, hallucinogen persisting perception disorder.
Okay, so the physical risks might be low, but the psychological risks, that's a different story. And then there are the ethical issues too, right? I mean, these substances have been used spiritually for centuries, but there's also potential for harm, exploitation.
Absolutely. Strassman even talks about this tragic case, a suicide that happened during a psilocybin study. Not because of the drug itself, but because of the pressure the participant felt to have a mystical experience. It was part of the study's framework.
Oh, wow. That's awful. It shows you how important it is to be really careful, especially in research settings, to be aware of the potential psychological impact.
Exactly. Even with the best intentions, things can go wrong. So responsible use, harm reduction, ethical considerations, all of that is absolutely crucial as we explore this new frontier.
All right, well, that was a lot. Lots to think about. So let's shift gears a bit. Strassman covers a whole range of psychedelics in his book, right?
He does. It's like a psychedelic sampler pack. Ancient plant medicines to modern synthetics, each with its own unique properties and effects.
Okay, I'm ready for a taste test. What's first up on our psychedelic tour?
Well, let's start with one of the oldest and most revered, mescaline.
Mescaline. That's from peyote, right?
Exactly. Peyote and San Pedro cacti. It's been used for centuries in indigenous cultures, mostly for ceremonies.
Yeah, I remember reading about Native American peyote rituals. But isn't there some controversy surrounding its use?
There is. For one, the peyote cactus is endangered. So there are ethical concerns about sourcing it, making sure it's sustainable.
Right. So it's not just about the individual experience, it's about the impact on the environment, too, and respecting cultural traditions.
Exactly. Then there's LSD, probably the most well-known psychedelic out there.
LSD, the 60s, Timothy Leary, turn on, tune in, drop out, all that.
That's the one. LSD is lab-made, and it's known for being really potent and long-lasting. Trips can last up to 12 hours.
12 hours? Whoa. That's a long time to be tripping. No wonder people talk about having such profound experiences on it.
Right. But because it's so strong and lasts so long, both good and bad trips can be really intense.
So set and setting are even more crucial with LSD.
Absolutely. And then there's psilocybin, the stuff in magic mushrooms.
Magic mushrooms. Seems like those are having a bit of a moment right now.
They are. They're easier to get than you might think. And there's a lot of research happening now on its therapeutic potential, especially for things like depression, anxiety.
I heard about that. Psilocybin for mental health. It sounds promising, but I do wonder about the long-term effects.
Yeah, that's still being studied. But one thing about psilocybin is that it doesn't last as long as LSD. More like 4 or 6 hours.
Okay, that seems a little more manageable. What about DMT? The spirit molecule. All this talk about otherworldly beings traveling to other dimensions.
DMT is definitely unique. Short, intense trips, lots of visuals, and a lot of people feel like they're being transported somewhere else entirely. Ayahuasca is making it more popular these days, too.
Ayahuasca, right. That brew they make in the Amazon. Sounds pretty intense.
It can be. But ayahuasca is more than just DMT. It has other ingredients, too. And it's traditionally used in a ceremonial setting with experienced guides.
Not something to try at home, then.
Definitely not. And speaking of things not to try at home, there's 5-MeO-DMT.
Oh, that one sounds a little sketchy. What's the deal with that one?
Well, it's from toad venom.
Toad venom, seriously?
Well, yeah. And it's known for being super intense, ego-dissolving. People often have amnesia afterwards. Having a good sitter is essential with this one.
Okay, I think I'll pass on the toad venom.
Yeah.
For now, anyway. What about ibogaine? I've heard that one being used to treat addiction.
Ibogaine is interesting, for sure. There's some evidence it can help break addiction patterns, but it's also got some serious risks, especially for the heart.
So, high risk, high reward.
Yeah, something like that. It's a tough ethical call. Then you've got MDMA, of course. Ecstasy Molly.
MDMA. The love drug. All about feelings of euphoria, connection.
Exactly. Less visual, more emotional. But there are concerns about neurotoxicity, especially if you use it a lot.
Moderation is key, I guess, like with most things. What about ketamine? I know it's used as anesthesia in hospitals, but I've also heard about it being used for, like, depression and stuff.
Ketamine is getting a lot of attention lately. In lower doses, it can act as a really fast-acting antidepressant. It's even been FDA approved for treatment-resistant depression.
Wow, so it's literally going from the operating room to the therapist's office.
No.
But there are still risks, right?
Oh, yeah. It can be a powerful dissociative anesthetic. And there's the whole K-hole thing, which is not fun for most people. Pretty disorienting, uncomfortable.
Right. Okay, so it seems like the theme here is there's potential, but there's also real risk. It's all about weighing those things carefully and making informed choices.
Exactly. And then finally, there's Salvia divinorum. This one's, well, it's kind of in its own category.
Salvia, yeah. I've heard things. About salvia, what makes it so different?
The trips are short, they're disorienting, and often really unpleasant. People feel disconnected from their bodies, have strange hallucinations, sometimes even feel like they're turning into objects.
Okay, yeah. Not sure I understand the appeal of that one. So we've got this whole spectrum of substances, from ancient plants to toad venom to whatever salvia is. But after hearing all this about the risks, the benefits, what does Strassman say about responsible use? If someone's thinking about trying a psychedelic, what advice does he give?
That's a great question, and it's something he really emphasizes. Responsible use, harm reduction. He's very clear that this is a journey, not a joyride. Preparation is key, mentally, practically.
Yeah, not something to just jump into head first.
Right. Intention is important. Set clear intentions before you start. Don't try to figure it out mid-trip.
That sounds like a recipe for a bad time. And I know we've talked about set and setting, but it seems even more important here. Safe space, trusted people.
Absolutely. And Strassman also talks about choosing your sitter carefully, the person who stays sober and supports you during the experience. It's tempting to just trust anyone who offers you psychedelics, but he points out some red flags to watch out for.
Red flags? Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, someone who pressures you to take more than you're comfortable with, or someone who seems unstable themselves, or someone with, ulterior motives. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is.
Good advice. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement, the mystery of it all, but it's important to remember that there are real risks.
And Strassman also talks about the importance of music. Choose something that sets the right mood, but be ready to change it up if you need to. What's blissful for one person might be torture for another.
Yeah, music can definitely make or break the experience. So we've covered preparation, set and setting, sitter, music. Anything else?
One more thing. Microdosing.
Ah, right, microdosing. That seems to be all the rage these days. But what is it exactly?
It's basically taking tiny doses of psychedelics,
Yeah.
so small that you don't actually trip. People say it can help with creativity, focus, mood.
So like getting the benefits without the actual psychedelic experience.
That's the idea. But the research is still pretty limited. We know it causes changes in the brain, but how that translates into daily life, that's not so clear yet.
So more research is needed. The jury's still out on microdosing.
Exactly. But it's definitely an area to watch. I think we'll be hearing a lot more about it in the years to come.
Yeah, I'm curious to see where the science goes with this one. Wow, that was a lot. Brain chemistry, medieval philosophy, ethical dilemmas, even toad venom.
It's quite a journey. But I think it shows you how complex and multifaceted psychedelics really are. They touch on so much, from biology to spirituality, the personal to the societal.
Okay, my brain is officially full. Let's try to summarize. What are some of the biggest takeaways from Strassman's book so far?
Well, for me, learning that classical psychedelics are less toxic than aspirin was a huge surprise. I had always assumed they were really dangerous, physically.
Yeah, me too. And the fact that our brains might be producing DMT naturally, that just opens up so many questions about reality, consciousness.
And remember how the research team's own beliefs can influence the study results? It shows you how powerful the mind is, how deeply it's intertwined with the body.
Right, and all those different models of the mind, Freud, Buddhism,
Yeah.
medieval metaphysics, who knew there were so many ways to understand what's going on up there.
And even with all the wonder, all the potential, we can't forget the risks: mental health, responsible use, the possibility of lasting negative effects. Those are real concerns.
Absolutely. But even with all that, it's hard to deny the potential for healing, for transformation. Strassman's book really highlights that.
It does. It's a complex topic, and I think we're just scratching the surface here.
It's wild, right? Like we've got all this knowledge, but it's been, I don't know, kind of buried for so long.
Yeah, decades of suppressed research, basically. A lot of missed opportunities.
A whole detour, almost. Like we were heading down this interesting path then. Nope.
Thankfully, things are changing. More scientists, therapists, even some policymakers are starting to see the potential.
And that makes me think of something Strassman touches on but doesn't really dive into. Should psychedelics ever be fully legal? I mean, given all we've talked about, the good and the bad.
Oh, that's the million-dollar question. No easy answers there. We've seen what prohibition does, right? Criminalizing people for wanting to explore their consciousness. But these are powerful substances. There's potential for misuse, for harm.
It's a tough balance, right?
Ooh.
Personal freedom versus public safety.
Yeah. We need to think about the risks, the benefits, the social context, too. Maybe a harm reduction approach is the best way to go. Education, decriminalization, maybe regulated access for, like, therapy or spiritual purposes.
So not just letting everyone go wild, but also not keeping it locked up, only for a select few.
Right. Finding that middle ground, prioritizing safety, responsibility, and informed choice.
I bet this debate's going to get even more heated in the next few years as more research comes out, as public opinion shifts.
For sure. And it's a conversation we all need to have. It's about more than just the science, the laws. It's about our values, our beliefs, about what it means to be human, really.
So what can our listeners do if they, want to learn more? Strassman's book's a good start, but where else can they go?
MAPS is a great resource. The Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. They've been doing research and education for decades. Their website's a good place to start.
And there are a lot of podcasts, documentaries out there now, lots of different perspectives, personal stories.
But be careful. Not everything you see or hear is accurate. Stick to sources that are, grounded in science, ethical, harm reduction focused.
Good point. It's easy to get swept up in the hype, but got to stay critical.
And this is really just the beginning, right? There's still so much we don't know about these substances, their potential, their risks.
Feels like we've just dipped our toes in the water here.
Yeah.
And honestly, I have more questions now than answers.
That's good. Curiosity is how we learn. And the more we learn about psychedelics, the more we learn about ourselves, our minds even. I don't know, the nature of reality.
Whoa, deep. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap things up. We've covered a lot of ground today, from brain chemistry to spiritual experiences to toad venom.
It's been quite a ride.
Big thanks to you for being such a fantastic guide. Really insightful stuff.
Happy to be here. Always enjoy these conversations.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Hope you've learned something new about the wild world of psychedelics.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions. There's a lot more to discover.
Until next time, folks.